The silver spoon hovered, inches from Marcus Aldridge's lips when the scream shattered. The morning calm. "Don't eat that!" He froze, irritation flickering across his face as he turned toward the source of the disruption. A girl, no more than 12, stood barefoot on the sidewalk outside the cafe's glass window. Her clothes hung in tatters, her face streaked with grime. One thin arm extended through the partially open door, as if she could physically stop him from taking that bite. Marcus was worth $3.7 billion. He'd built an empire from nothing, crushed competitors without remorse, and learned long ago that sentiment was a luxury reserved for those who couldn't afford to be ruthless. He'd survived boardroom betrayals, hostile takeovers, and countless attempts to undermine his success. He certainly didn't need advice from a homeless child about what he should or shouldn't eat. "Security," he called, his voice cold and measured. But something in her eyes made him hesitate. Not fear, though she had every reason to be afraid. Not desperation, though her hollow cheeks suggested she hadn't eaten in days. What he saw was certainty, absolute and unwavering, mixed with something that looked uncomfortably like concern for him. The cafe manager rushed over, already apologizing, already reaching for the girl. "Mr. Aldridge, I'm so sorry." "I'll have her removed immediately." "Please!" the girl gasped, struggling against the manager's grip. "The food, it's not safe. I saw them. I saw what they did." Marcus should have looked away. Should have let security handle it. Should have taken that bite of his eggs. Benedict and continued reading the Wall Street Journal. Just another morning in his carefully controlled world. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the raw authenticity in her voice, so different from the calculated tones he heard in every business meeting. Maybe it was the fact that she'd risked humiliation and possible arrest not to beg for money, but to warn him. "Wait," he said, raising his hand. The manager stopped, looking confused. "What did you see?" The girl's eyes widened, as if she couldn't believe he was actually listening. "I sleep in the alley behind the kitchen. Last night, 2 men came. They weren't cooks. They wore suits like yours. They paid the morning chef to put something in your food, a powder. They said your name. I heard everything." Marcus felt the temperature in the room drop. In his world, paranoia wasn't a disorder, it was survival. He'd made enemies, plenty of them. Richard Chen, whose company he'd acquired last year. The Davidson family, still bitter about the real estate deal that made him millions. Senator Morrison, whose corruption he'd threatened to expose. "Why should I believe you?" he asked, studying her face for any sign of deception, any hint that this was some elaborate scheme. "Because I watched them," she said simply. "Because I know what poison looks like. My mama, she died like that. Someone put something in her food at the shelter. Said it was just bad luck, bad food. But I saw the man who did it. Same way they moved. Same way they looked around to make sure nobody was watching. They didn't see me. Nobody ever sees me." The weight of that last sentence hit him harder than any business loss ever had. Nobody ever sees me. How many times had he walked past people like her, invisible in their poverty, irrelevant to his concerns? Marcus pushed his plate away and stood. "What's your name?" "Lily." "Lily, I'm going to have this food tested. If you're telling the truth, you may have just saved my life. If you're lying, well, we'll deal with that too." He nodded to his bodyguard. "Take the plate. I want a full analysis within the hour, and nobody leaves this kitchen until I know exactly what's in that food." The cafe erupted in chaos. Staff protested, other diners whispered, phones came out to capture the drama. But Marcus only watched Lily, this slip of a girl who had nothing to gain and everything to lose by speaking up. 47 minutes later, his phone rang. The lab tech's voice was shaking. "Mr. Aldridge, it's polonium-210, radioactive poison. Incredibly rare, incredibly lethal. Another few bites, and you'd have had maybe 3 weeks to live. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." The world seemed to tilt. Marcus had faced death before, or thought he had. Market crashes, business risks, the abstract possibility of danger. But this was different. This was real. This was someone who hated him enough to kill him slowly, painfully. He found Lily sitting on the curb outside, hugging her knees, probably expecting him to forget about her now that the crisis had passed. That's what people did to her, he realized. Used her when convenient, discarded her when not. "You were right," he said, sitting down beside her, ignoring the shocked looks from passers-by. Marcus Aldridge didn't sit on curbs. The food was poisoned. "You saved my life. She looked at him, no triumph in her eyes, just quiet sadness. My mama used to say that rich folks think poor folks can't see nothing, can't know nothing, but we see everything. We just don't matter enough for anyone to listen. You mattered today, Marcus said quietly. You mattered very much. You gonna give me a reward? She asked, not greedy, just curious. That's what happens in movies. Poor girl saves rich man, gets a big check, lives happily ever after? Marcus considered her question. He could write her a check right now. $100,000. $1 million. Numbers that would change her life, salve his conscience, make for a nice story he could tell at dinner parties. But looking at her thin face, her knowing eyes that had seen too much too young, he understood that money alone wouldn't fix what was broken. I'm going to do something better, he said. I'm going to listen. Tell me about your mama. Tell me what happened. Tell me what you need. And she did. For the first time in longer than she could remember, someone with power actually listened. She told him about her mother, a teacher who'd lost her job when budget cuts came, about the spiral into homelessness, the shelters, the streets, about the caseworker who stopped returning calls, about the system that made people fill out forms but never followed through, about being 12 years old and invisible. Marcus listened with growing horror, not at the dramatic tragedy of it, but at the bureaucratic indifference, the small failures that added up to destroyed lives, the way society had decided that some people simply didn't matter enough to save. 3 months later, the Lilly Foundation opened its doors. Not a handout program, but something different. A place where homeless youth could find not just shelter, but dignity. Not just food, but skills. Not just survival, but hope. Marcus had liquidated one of his smaller companies to fund it. Much to his board's dismay, you're letting emotion cloud your judgment, his CFO had argued. Maybe, Marcus had replied, or maybe I'm seeing clearly for the first time in 20 years. Lilly became the foundation's first success story, but not its last. She returned to school, thrived, and eventually became a voice for the invisible, the ones society preferred not to see. As for Marcus, he found the men who'd poisoned his food. Turned out it was a competitor's hired thugs. They went to prison. But what haunted him wasn't how close he'd come to death. It was how close he'd come to ignoring the warning. How easily he might have dismissed Lilly, might have taken that fatal bite simply because listening to a homeless child didn't fit into his worldview. 5 years later, at the Foundation's anniversary gala, Lilly took the stage. No longer the dirty, desperate girl from the street, but poised, educated, and still carrying that same fierce certainty in her eyes. Mr. Aldridge asked me to say a few words, she began, her voice steady. He wants me to talk about how he saved my life, but that's not the real story. The real story is that he did something most people never do. He listened. Not because I was important, not because I had anything to offer him, but because at that moment he chose to see me as human, as someone whose words mattered. And that choice didn't just save his life, it saved mine. Marcus stood in the back of the room, tears streaming down his face. He'd built skyscrapers, commanded boardrooms, moved markets with a word. But the greatest thing he'd ever done was pause, listen and see another person's humanity. The beggar girl had said, "Don't eat that." He wouldn't have listened unless he saw it. Really saw it. That look in her eyes that said, "You matter to me, even though I have every reason to believe I don't matter to anyone." And in that moment of seeing and being seen, both of their lives had changed forever.